Welcome back to Beyond the Clue by Phong. Today, we're going to unravel another chilling true crime case. A story that will force you to question the very nature of coincidence and the cascading tragedies within a single family. If you recall the peculiar case we once explored from India, where a house seemed to be haunted by successive deaths, then today's narrative evokes a similar, perhaps even more unsettling feeling. This time, our journey to unravel the mystery takes us to a colder, more distant land, Ontario, Canada. This case was suggested by a comment from one of our viewers, Henry. And now, join me as we delve into the darkness that enveloped a family that those around them could only describe as unfortunate. Our story begins at the seemingly tranquil house located at 3635 Willow Creek Lane, in the quiet town of Meadowbrook, Ontario, Canada. This was the beloved home of Mr. and Mrs. George and Evelyn Sterling. For nearly 40 years, they lived a joyful and harmonious life, known by everyone as friendly, welcoming pillars of their community, a picture of serene domesticity. In 1973, facing the inability to have biological children, George and Evelyn made the heartfelt decision to adopt. They welcomed Ethan, a delightful 6-month-old baby boy, into their lives. Ethan grew up showered with the love and meticulous care of the Sterling family, cherished as if he were their biological son. Everything appeared to be perfectly idyllic to an almost unbelievable extent. Time, however, marches on relentlessly. In the year 2000, when Ethan was 27, he met and fell deeply in love with his future wife, Jessica Hayes. Jessica came from a well-respected background. Both her father and brother were seasoned police officers. This further reassured the Sterlings about Ethan's relationship. It seemed their perfect life was set to continue, even expand, with this happy union. Ethan and Jessica were deeply smitten, marrying in 2003 and quickly welcoming 2 children into their lives, a son and a daughter. Soon after, Ethan moved out of his parents' home to start his new life with his own family in Fairview Heights, not far from his childhood residence. Mr. and Mrs. George and Evelyn Sterling proudly embraced their roles as doting grandparents, showering their grandchildren with endless affection. But, like many relationships, fissures began to appear between Ethan and Jessica. Financial strains, disagreements over the children. The cracks in their marital foundation grew wider, deeper. Just 2 years into their marriage, in 2005, they made the devastating decision to file for divorce. This event dealt a crushing blow to Ethan. Not only was his love shattered, but he was also forced to confront the agony of not seeing his children every day. He moved back in with his parents at the old house, and from that point, the emotional turmoil began to drive Ethan down a dark path of alcohol abuse. He was frequently seen wandering local bars, drowning his sorrows, desperately trying to numb the harsh reality that consumed him. Then, the true tragedy struck. One night in 2005, intoxicated, Ethan drove home and caused a horrific accident. A devastating collision resulted in the immediate death of a taxi driver and left 4 passengers severely injured. Ethan himself sustained grave injuries. Yet, something far more sinister was still lurking. Weeks after that near-fatal accident, while Ethan was still recuperating in the hospital from his critical injuries, Jessica, his ex-wife, shockingly accused him of breaking into and assaulting her at her home. Naturally, the police couldn't believe such an absurd accusation. How could a man barely able to walk, let alone move, possibly attack someone? Following their divorce, Ethan and Jessica had agreed to a 50-50th custody arrangement for their children. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling were delighted to spend ample time with their grandchildren. As for Jessica, she had since remarried a man named Mark Olson and had also had a child with him. On the 16th of April, 2009, at 9 p.m., Mrs. Evelyn Sterling returned home after a long day at work. It's worth noting that Ethan was still serving his sentence in prison for the drunk driving incident from 2005. The moment she stepped inside, Evelyn sensed something was terribly wrong. The entire house was plunged into darkness, unsettlingly silent. Mr. George should have been home, waiting for her for dinner, as was their routine. Evelyn called out, but there was no response, just an eerie, heavy silence. Finally, she found Mr. George lying motionless in the bathroom. He was no longer breathing. Despite forensic reports noting a few scratches and broken bones on Mr. George's body, the police delivered a baffling conclusion. Mr. George had died suddenly from cardiac arrest, ruled a natural death. Let's assume for a moment that conclusion was accurate. But just 1 year later, on the 21st of April, 2010, a chillingly similar event unfolded. Ethan's son, now a bit older, returned home from school to a horrifying sight. His grandmother, Evelyn, lying motionless at the bottom of the stairs. The boy, distraught, immediately sought help from a neighbor, and paramedics were called, but it was too late. Evelyn appeared to have accidentally fallen down the stairs, though, curiously, her body also bore a few unexplained bruises. During this period, Ethan had been released from prison earlier than expected due to good behavior. Meanwhile, Jessica was relentlessly, frantically pursuing full custody of their children. She launched countless accusations, claiming Ethan was a terrible father, and even that the Sterling family had physically harmed the children. But police quickly discovered these allegations were completely fabricated. Jessica had even coached the children to lie in court. Let's rewind briefly to a year prior, in 2009, when Mr. George had just passed away and Ethan was still in prison. At that time, Mrs. Evelyn was granted shared custody of the grandchildren, 50-50. But Jessica, along with her new husband Mark, brazenly took the two children she shared with Ethan and vanished. It took over 7 months for police to locate and arrest her for parental abduction. The custody hearing for that abduction was set for the 22nd of April, 2010, with Mrs. Evelyn as a key witness. But do you remember? Just 1 day before that crucial court date, on the 21st of April, 2010, Mrs. Evelyn was found dead at the bottom of the stairs. A terrifying coincidence, wouldn't you say? Or was it a deliberate orchestration? Following the deaths of both Mr. and Mrs. George and Evelyn Sterling, countless questions were raised. George died on the 16th of April, and Evelyn on the 21st of April the following year. That means Evelyn passed away just 5 days after her husband's first death anniversary. In both incidents, the house showed no signs of forced entry or struggle. There were also no indications on the victims' bodies of a struggle or altercation with an assailant. Ethan was completely shattered by the loss of both his adoptive parents. He urged the police to investigate Jessica and her husband Mark. Jessica, during her testimony, was evasive and contradictory. Initially, she claimed Mrs. Evelyn might have been so haunted by her husband's death that, after a year, she decided to follow him. The spot where Evelyn was found dead was only a few steps from where Mr. Flyfree, George's body, was discovered. Then, indirectly, Jessica shifted suspicion onto Ethan, claiming he didn't get along well with Mrs. Evelyn and that they frequently had major arguments due to differing opinions. And just like that, Ethan became the primary suspect in Mrs. Evelyn's death, as he was the one who stood to benefit most from the deaths of both his parents, the life insurance money, and the house itself. However, all friends and relatives of the wider Sterling family believed that accusation to be ludicrous. Despite not being their biological son, Ethan loved his adoptive parents dearly. Ultimately, Mrs. Evelyn's death was concluded as a suspicious incident, but that was all. The case was eventually closed with the cause of death listed as undetermined, and no further investigation was pursued. Rumors about the house at 3635 Willow Creek Lane began to spread like wildfire, and the tragedy, disturbingly, was far from over. In 2013, Ethan was still living in that house, sharing 50-50th custody with Jessica. In July 2013, Jessica filed another motion in court, seeking permanent full custody, meaning she wanted to strip Ethan of his parental rights entirely. And then, on the 23rd of July, 2013, Ethan didn't show up for work. A concerned colleague went to his house to check on him, only to find him lying in his bedroom, dead for several hours. This time, Ethan's body bore clear signs of blunt force trauma and strangulation. This was undeniably a murder. Police should have declared this back when Mr. George died, but it took this third tragic incident for them to finally commit to a thorough investigation. Ethan's autopsy revealed striking similarities in the injuries to those found on Mrs. Evelyn's body. From that point, police began to dig deeper into the singular link between the Sterling family and Jessica, the relentless custody battle, a bitter war that had dragged on for 8 agonizing years, beginning in 2005. A search of Jessica and Mark's home yielded a brand new pair of sneakers found in the trash bin, shoes that had been purchased just one day before the night Ethan was murdered. In addition, police found a glove containing DNA from both Ethan and Mark. Most critically, beneath Ethan's fingernails, investigators discovered skin fragments belonging to Mark. This evidence alone could have led to Mark's immediate arrest. However, police chose to monitor the situation further. 2 weeks after Ethan's death, Jessica filed for full sole custody of their children. Following this, the entire family, including the 2 children she shared with Ethan, moved to a new location under police surveillance. They were eagerly anticipating starting a new life, a happy family. But then, at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, May 28, 2014, police raided the couple's new home and proceeded with arrests. Jessica Irene Hayes, 33, and her husband Mark Olson, 36, were both taken into custody, charged with first-degree murder for the deaths of both Mrs. Evelyn Sterling and Ethan Sterling. During a 13-hour interrogation, Mark confessed to everything. He claimed he intensely disliked Ethan because Ethan had treated the children poorly. Evidently, Jessica had fed him these fabricated stories to manipulate him and to win back the children for his wife. Mark had attacked Mrs. Evelyn and Ethan. He made no mention of Mr. George's death. Furthermore, Mark emphatically claimed Jessica had no involvement in either murder until everything came to light. Essentially, he insisted Jessica was completely innocent. However, lies, like a thin veil, cannot conceal the truth indefinitely. Secrets, like a needle in a sack, eventually pierce through. On their way back to detention, Mark and Jessica were placed in the same holding cell. They began to talk, completely unaware that a recording device was hidden within the room. Mark was heard whispering to Jessica that he had taken full responsibility for the crimes, hoping to reduce her sentence so she could be released sooner to care for their children. As for Mr. George's death, at the time the case was initially brought to trial, his body had already been cremated, leaving no physical evidence for further investigation. But 2 years later, in 2016, Mark was additionally charged with second-degree murder for the death of Mr. George Sterling, because police had discovered shocking search history on the couple's laptop, including terms like, "How long does it take for someone to die from suffocation?" and "easy ways to get away with murder," among others. In 2018, the official trial commenced. There, Mark altered his confession, claiming he did not kill Mrs. Evelyn and only accidentally killed Ethan during a struggle. But ultimately, Mark Olson was found guilty of murdering both Evelyn Sterling and Ethan Sterling, receiving a life sentence. As for Jessica Irene Hayes, initially charged with all 3 murders, she ultimately pleaded guilty to manslaughter in Ethan Sterling's death, receiving a 15-year sentence with enhanced credit, meaning 1 day in pre-trial custody counted as 1.5 days of her sentence. She had been in pre-trial detention since 2014, so just this past March, she was released. A rather intriguing detail about Jessica Hayes: despite her husband Mark's efforts to take full responsibility for her, it seems she wasn't particularly grateful. During her time in a women's prison, she married another female inmate. As for Mark, he is currently still single and, disturbingly, is reportedly seeking a new partner within prison. Regarding the 2 children Ethan shared with Jessica, there is not much information available about them after the final trial. However, Jessica was required by court order to have no direct contact with the children for 20 years. So, it's highly likely these children are now living with relatives of the Sterling family. And finally, about the house at 3635 Willow Creek Lane, the very place where 3 successive murders occurred. It was successfully sold in November 2015 for just over 900,000 Canadian dollars, a rather good deal. And, well, it had to be, given its blood-soaked history. A higher price could never have been justified. And that is everything I've uncovered. about the tragic and chilling case of the Sterling family. A deeply sorrowful and horrifying story where the bizarre daughter-in-law effectively orchestrated the demise of her former in-law's entire family, not unlike that chilling case in India we previously covered. Feel free to leave a comment below with any cases you'd like me to investigate or share. Thank you again, Henry, for suggesting today's compelling case. Until next time, stay safe out there.